The New Orleans Secular Humanists Association welcomes everyone who's interested in exploring ideas from the humanist, non-religious perspective.
For me, secular humanism is a philosophy for living and learning. Secular humanists use science and reason to understand the universe and solve human problems.
As a non-religious person, I cannot accept supernatural answers to life's questions. Secular humanists confine their search for the truth to the natural world.
Some of my highest goals in life are expressed in human secularism: to enjoy life in the here and now, and to strive for moral excellence.
We believe in striving for the best and noblest that is possible in human beings.
These viewpoints reflect our philosophy, which applies to all aspects of our lives. Each of our programs will try to apply reason to various interesting topics and show how this approach differs from the dogma of non-humanist thinking. Hello and welcome again to the Humanist Perspective in New Orleans. I'm Harry Greenberger, host for the show, and we appreciate your being here. We have some interesting things to talk about today. And with me today on our panel are two of our members. We have Harvy Stern, Lanny Goldfinch, and our special guest today is Baty Landis. I have to get this right. And in general, we're talking about an unpleasant situation, which is the crime in the city of New Orleans. And it was back at the end of 2006 and in January of 2007 when some really bad murders took place in the Marigny and Bywater section of the city, which for those of you who may not know are just outside of the French Quarter. And because of the killing of these innocent people, a group which included Baty Landis decided that someone had to speak out against the problem. And so she and her group put together a march in January of 2007, a march to City Hall to speak out. And from all reports, there were about 5,000 people who joined you in that march, which probably came as a surprise to you. So, Baty, why don't you give us some of the, something about those murders that brought this to the forefront, and then about how you came to organize, you and your others came to organize a group which you are calling Silence is Violence.
Right. Well, what was so shocking for New Orleanians, I think, about the intensification of violent crime, and especially murders in late 2006, was that we had actually enjoyed a period of relative calm in terms of violence in the city following Hurricane Katrina and the flood. And I think there was a sense of false security, what turned out to be false security, when many of us felt comfortable leaving our doors unlocked and walking around the city at all hours of the night. And it really seemed that for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, New Orleans was a very safe city. And that started to change in early 2006 and really came to a head during the summer of 2006 when 5 young men were murdered in Central City, Marquis Hunter, Arsenio Hunter, and 3 of their friends in the middle of summer of 2006. And that brought violence in New Orleans into the national spotlight, the fact that we were back as a violent city. And unfortunately, the violence continued to intensify up to the climactic point, which for me was the murder of a friend of mine, Daenerys Shavers, on December 28th of 2006. And when the violence in New Orleans hit me personally on that day, I decided I really needed to do something as a citizen and as a friend of Daeneryl's. He was also a neighbor of mine. He lived in the Bywater. I live in the Marigny, so we lived very near each other. And 1 week later, another neighbor of mine was murdered, also Helen Hill, who was a filmmaker. And many people in the Marigny and Bywater knew I had been planning to do something on behalf of Daenerys and came to me asking if I would help to organize a march to City Hall. And that's how the march came about. And the organization Silences Violence actually itself grew out of the march. There was no such organization before January 11th. When we looked around and realized how many thousands of New Orleanians and Louisianians, because people came from all over the state to participate in the March to City Hall, were really feeling what we were feeling and needing the expressive outlet that we also were needing on that day.
And when you marched to City Hall, then a number of people made talks, presentations.
Right.
Was that all prearranged, or anyone who wanted to got up and spoke?
No, it was prearranged. Nothing was prearranged very far in advance, because we only we planned the entire march in a 6-day period. From the initial conception to the morning of the march itself. But we very quickly realized, and initially it did seem like a Marigny Bywater expression, sort of a neighborhood statement that we weren't okay with the violence that was taking place amongst our friends and neighbors. But it very quickly became evident that communities all over New Orleans also needed an outlet, and we made a point of inviting representatives from New Orleans East, from Central City, from the Irish Channel, from all over the city, from the West Bank. And that's how we came up with the roster of speakers we had, was by trying to identify neighborhoods in New Orleans that had a strong sense of identity following the storm and as part of the recovery, and who might feel that they had something to say in the face of the crisis in public safety.
And what was the theme of most of those talks, or was it one theme that covered all of them?
Well, you know, we really did not dictate or suggest anything to the speakers beyond simply inviting them to speak on however they wanted to speak on this issue of violent crime in New Orleans. But what emerged was a consensus lack of trust in our public officials, from the mayor to the city council to law enforcement, the NOPD, to the criminal justice system, the DA's office. And so over the course of that morning and that afternoon, a theme did emerge that was not prescribed in advance, but that only reinforced our impression that many New Orleanians, most New Orleanians, the vast, vast majority, were on the same page and feeling the same anguish and grief and also fear in what appeared to be a very chaotic situation, not only on the level of the streets, but also on the level of our leadership. And so that's what I and the other organizers of the march took away from that day, was the need of so many New Orleanians to hold our leaders more accountable and to sustain a dialogue with them and to participate as citizens in making the city safer.